All right, Mr. President, Board of Trustees, today is the May 5th, 2025 Board Workshop. In today's workshop, we do not have any public comment. And in today's workshop, we are going to, Jennifer Hanna, our CFO, is going to present the budget workshop number 5. She'll have some information about legislative updates for you as well. We have a SHAC presentation, but I'm going to come back to that. We have a bond projects update that will be presented by Wes Vanchek. And then long-range planning committee update will be presented and emceed by Mr. Landon Heflin. So before we get into that, we had first put on the School Health Advisory Committee presentation on this agenda. We do have to present to the Board of Trustees once a year, but it can be in written form or a board presentation. Since there's no budgetary impact based upon their report, we're going to provide you a formal written notice. And Mr. President, I'm going to ask that we pull this item as a presentation from today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then how is it shared with the public if we're only going to get it in writing?
We're going to post it in on our website. The formalized SHAC write-up will be posted on our website. We'll include a link to it on e-news as well.
Will there be any way for people to comment or ask questions to follow on it?
Yeah.
I imagine there aren't any surprises or anything.
No, there won't be any surprises in terms of any impact to changes from the SHAC presentation, but it will be posted there. There will be a link where individuals can utilize Let's Talk to inform us of any questions that they have. All right, we're going to move forward. I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Hanna for budget workshop number 5.
Dun, dun, dun.
Thank you. So we've been meeting regarding budget for the last couple of months, and so points that we're going to cover today, the board budget parameters and expectations, board budget priorities, brief legislative update, 25-26 next year's budget, updated assumptions, information regarding the VATRE, and then our upcoming key budget dates. As a reminder, the Board of Trustees developed some budget parameters and expectations to guide us through this process, and for that we are grateful. And they are here on this slide. The board also set budget priorities for us. For next year. And they're on the slide. So we wanted to give you a brief legislative update. There's been a lot of activity going on in the legislature. We're in the last month, and there's a lot of deadlines, internal deadlines approaching for the House and the Senate. So we're going to start hopefully seeing some movement and some decisions. The last day of this regular session is June 2nd. So Senate Bill 2, which was a priority of the governor, it was passed by the House and the Senate, and it was signed by the governor over the weekend. So this is the vouchers bill, Senate Bill 2. It did pass, and it's been signed by the governor. This bill, students will be able to begin assessing the education savings accounts in the 2026-27 school year. So not this next school year, but the following. And I'm sure that's just in an effort to get processes in place for that. So House Bill 2, which is the school funding bill, and really is a priority bill for us that we have been following, it passed the House, and it's now over in the Senate. It doesn't seem to be moving quickly in the Senate. It doesn't have any date set for a hearing in the Senate. However, we do hear that it's got movement. As it is written currently, we would get a $395 increase in the basic allotment, plus some other increases, which we didn't list here, in some other allotments. So it would give us more revenue. It's likely to look different by the time it gets through the Senate, is what we understand. So, and we also think it's going to take a little while, like a couple of weeks, to close to the end of session in order for us. So we're still in anticipation of what that bill will bring to us as far as new revenue. And we won't be adopting a compensation plan with any kind of compensation increases until we see what comes out of House Bill 2. We will be adopting a compensation plan in June with the budget. We have several models, but until we know what revenue we'll be getting, we won't be passing anything with compensation increase. None of the models that we're looking at for the budget right now have a compensation increase in them. But whether we do a 0% increase or something higher, we'll pass that in June. And it can always be amended as well. But we will have to pass something in June, and hopefully we'll know what this will be by then.
I have a question around that, if you don't mind.
Sure, of course.
So I know this may change, but with the previous projection of, I think it was a basic allotment increase of around a little over less than $700. I think we kind of projected that around like a $7 million increase to the district. Do we have any idea of what this would be? Maybe like 4.5, something?
This is still the
It's
same projection. When you add in all the
Oh, it's the other
essentially below the line additions that the legislature would have for us, we project it could be anywhere from 6 to 7 billion, but this bill still has million. This bill still has to make it from the House to the Senate, and we anticipate that there will be changes made to this. And it hasn't even made it to the Senate yet. It hasn't made it to a committee hearing, hasn't gone for a full vote, and it's already May. So we have to plan for worst case scenario, which is nothing happens.
Sure.
And just to underline what Ms. Hannah said before, the compensation plan that we would approve or bring to you in June is basically a no compensation increase. That is, it's not much of a plan. And then we would have the opportunity to amend the compensation plan in July if legislative action took place late. But the legislative session ends at the beginning of June. So it is likely we know what reality looks like as we go into the June budget workshop.
That's our hope. Switching gears a little bit, this does affect us. It doesn't affect us as much on the general fund side, but it is a very stringent bill on new debt issuances, which would affect us as a district. We could not exceed 20% of our average property tax collections for the preceding 3 years in a new debt issuance. So it would limit the amount of debt that we could issue. It also would eliminate the option to have an election in May. We would have to have an election in November. And then also, as we go through the process to adopt the INS, the interest in seeking tax rate, it would have some more steps that we would need to take in order to do that.
Could you explain the new debt issuance a little bit more?
Mm-hmm.
Is that even if a bond is passed, we still have to kind of time it as to how much we could issue?
What would that have meant, just ballpark numbers, like the 2024 bond, how would that have changed the amount of a bond that we could go out for?
Well, as far as the interest in sinking payment that we added because of the 2024 bond was about, I believe was about, I'm gonna say 10 million for the interest and the principal. And so, and our property collections are about our property tax collections are about 140 million. So 10% of that would be 14 million, so it wouldn't have probably affected us on a 2024 bond. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, do you
But
see
it is
that?
an average of the last 3 years, so, and then with tax conversion, tax collections are reduced.
So in layman's terms, how does this make going out for bonds harder for any school district, but in specifically Georgetown?
Because it would limit us, if it would limit us the amount of debt that we could issue. And so even if the voters approved and they know that we need a new facility or the different.
And then they see us waiting to actually get the money to do what we promised them.
Right.
So potentially it limits our ability to keep up with growth.
So now we just have to be even more diligent about forecasting well before we anticipate the need.
Which,
Now, this hasn't passed, and I've heard
yeah,
that there's a
these
few
schools,
growths
the
that
cost
are,
of maintenance are
time.
key.
but it's moving through, so, but it has not, none of these have passed yet.
Thank you, Jen.
So this one is is actually better news. This one is Senate Bill 260 on school safety. We currently get $10 per average daily attendance and $15,000 per campus. They would increase that to $14 for ADA and $37,000 per campus. So this is greatly needed, and this would be a good one if it passed.
I'm sorry, I had a note on that. Could you speak a little bit about, because that seems really significant to me, it's more than doubling. Do you have any, forgive my ignorance, do you have any idea what you might use that money toward? I know safety, but what?
Jennifer, the $4 in an ADA edition is separate from the $37,000 per campus. So, you know, $4 for every student, 14,000 students is roughly $56,000 for the district plus $37,000. So we'd be looking at ballpark $90,000 to $100,000 addition for the school district.
37 times 17, right? So
Yeah,
37.
Oh, 37 plus
Yeah.
37 times the
Times,
campuses, that's
yeah.
correct.
Right, so you're talking on $750,000.
But to your point,
Any ideas
but to your-
about, yeah.
well, to your point, we currently spend more on safety
Right.
and security than the allotment. So what it would do would free up additional funds to use in other areas. So I'm not sure that we necessarily add with that money, but we would use it.
Right.
But this helps us pay for our school resource officers and
Right.
All the,
And
state- all
everything
the
that's-
funded mandates we
That-
currently
right.
already
So
do.
that's, this is an
This would help
attempt
offset that.
to add funding for those mandates that are already.
Help close the gap
Close the
that
gap.
already exists.
Yeah, I'll just remind us that when we added school marshals to every campus, that was close to $800,000 to $1 million in additional costs that we took on as a school district. So this would start to close that gap of not being funded to fully funded.
Just not be funded, not quite as bad.
Less thankful.
And then the last one, I know you've heard us talk about the reduction in the school health and related services reimbursements, SHARs. This bill is also very welcomed, and it is appropriating $934 million across the state to assist districts with the funding that they've lost due to that SHARs reimbursement going down.
so what kind of things would that cover?
Well, again, that would help with the operations of the general fund, because we are providing those services to our students.
Yes.
However,
Is this all our mental health initiatives count? I mean, what is exactly we're doing now?
all the Medicaid students, the
Okay,
special education
okay.
services.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that is all we have on that. So let's take a look. We've looked at our budget assumptions a couple of times here for the last couple of months. We're getting a little bit more solid as we get through the process. However, these still will likely change, particularly things that TEA has control over or the legislature has control over. So let's just kind of go through where we are. The demographer has projected in that 25-26 column 14,060 students. We will be getting a new demographer report in May, so we might see some movement there. Not anticipating it at this point. It's a little bit slightly higher growth than, slightly lower growth than what we've been seeing. He's projecting 1.2%. Which if we use the 93% average daily attendance, that is 13,076, which is what we've been using for our average daily attendance. We did get our preliminary property values from the Williamson Central Appraisal District. We got them last week. They were slightly higher than what we've been projecting. They came in at 25.1 billion instead of the 24.6 billion that we had been projecting. However, I will say that they're not adjusted for what the legislature may do as far as they're looking at increasing the homestead exemption, $40,000, and then also increasing the business personal property tax exemption from $25,000 to $250,000. So this will likely go down again, but as of now, this is what we know. And it's about a 9% increase as it is over last year. I will say that you can note that it says before freeze, so we do have a lot of frozen property in the district. We don't have the information on the frozen property yet, they only provided the before freeze, but any of that frozen property will be excluded from any of the changes.
Such as like age and stuff.
Right, if you're over 65 or disabled. We do use 99% for our property tax collection rate. We are using 6,160, which is the current law, current basic allotment, hoping to see that number go up. Next time we show you numbers, you see. The M&O tax rate did go down to 0.6549. This is when we put our property values into the template. This automatically computes, so it gives us property tax compression on the rate since the values went up. So this is also set by TEA, but we won't know that for certain until August. And we're projecting the INS rate would stay the same. So these are the main budget assumptions that we're working with. So let's look at kind of where we are right now compared to where we were last time we met. So the column in blue, the last time we met, we were projecting a $3.7 million deficit, and we identified areas where we would cut in order to reduce that deficit and to balance the budget. So we have been working very hard on consolidating and cutting. And so in that peach colored column, the one that says 25-26 updated May 1st, 25, this is where we are now based on our most recent information. So for property taxes, if we start at the top with the revenues, we are showing property taxes to go up by $1.4 million, and that's because of that increase in the property tax values. We made a slight adjustment to other local income just based on our actual activity for this year. Our state funding went up slightly, and that has more to do with adjusting for some CTE coding that we talked about to get more funding for some classes that will be coded as CTE because they get weighted funding, additional money. That next row down is the TRS on the half. That's both a revenue and an expense. It's paid for by TRS. And now that we have consolidated and have in Skyward all of our salary negotiations for next year, that's what that has become. And then also we added a little bit in fuel. We've gotten a couple of fuel rebates, and we have some NJRTC revenue that we're getting, so we increased that slightly. And so that's now showing total revenues of $170.2 million, which is an increase of $1.9 million from last month.
And then we talked about some of the nutrition staff being allocated to a
We
different
moved
line
some.
item. What is that for?
Yeah,
Is
so that
for-
is going to be, when you go down to where it says operating expenditures and it says payroll, that is going to show up in that payroll line because they are no longer there. They're moved out now to Fund 240, which is general fund. So this is a consolidation. This is a summary. When we get either to the June 4th workshop or the June, we'll get more detail about each fund. But if we go, if we go back up to kind of look at expenditures, we are forecasting recapture to go up, and that's because, again, we're collecting more property taxes. And drawing your attention again to that payroll, so we're projecting payroll to be $132.3 million. So that is including the increases for the staffing allocations and then the decreases of those cuts that we made. So that is a net increase of $900,000. So had we not made all those cuts, we would be seeing a lot larger increase there.
Just to clarify, increase for staff allocations is increase in personnel, like the actual people, not.
Right, FTEs, yeah.
more people, not more money for the people.
Right, yeah. The next line down is our contracted services, which we have a large budget savings there. And that's really, for well, because we were doing budget savings, a lot of departments, did cut their contracted services, but we also, cut our custodial contract, so we're no longer paying a contracted service for that. Going into next year, we'll be paying, custodians. Also in supplies, there was a decrease of $335,000. Other operating has an increase of $298,000. That's primarily due to inflation for our property tax. Our property insurance premiums. We're projecting a 10% increase in our premium, and we have not gotten that yet. Fixed assets went down by $28,000. That's just the budget and reductions that the departments and the campuses made. So that's an overall reduction of $2.6 million. Again, that's a net of the additions that we're adding for staff FTEs, and then those positions and contracted services that were cut. So that brings us down to $170.2 million in total expenditures. And so that is a very small excess in fund balance of $40,725.
If you go, Jennifer, if you go up to the line where it says property value study, there's a dash there without an amount in there, and that's not exactly true, is it? We have an amount that we should put in there.
We were notified that we are going to receive $155,000. We received that notice last week. So we're starting that process. And again, that's an audit process that goes through the comptroller and then it goes to TEA. So yes, you're right, Dr. Adel, there's $155,000 that's not reflected there yet.
What line are we on now?
If you go up to revenues and you see a line called property value study, that is something that Jennifer initiates every year, and we have a third party. How would you describe a property value study?
It's an attorney firm that basically takes our property values, which are part of the funding formula, and then we can go back as far as 3 years. So they go back 3 years, and they it's a very detailed study of our property values, and from that if they find a savings, they will send that information to the comptroller. The comptroller then does their study of it, and then they send it to TEA.
Which
How does that
results.
generate revenue for
Yeah.
us?
So how does that generate
Because it's
revenue?
reducing the property values, the comptroller values, and the comptroller values are part of the funding formula.
How so, like, does it reduce the recapture? I don't understand.
It does reduce recapture.
Okay.
It sounds like there's more to it than that.
Well, it's part of, it is, we've talked a lot about the funding formula, and it's part of that funding formula. So it's going back, for example, this $155,000 is going back to 2021 and putting in a new comptroller value that will yield us $155,000 more than what TEA had originally given us.
I don't want to get stuck in the weeds, but are you talking about increased property value or decreased
No, it would be a
property?
decrease in property values.
Paying
Yeah.
property taxes.
Well, so the property taxes have already been collected.
Right.
So
Money
that-
that's already been
In the future.
collected and they
Right.
overcollected,
Which is
want to give it to
How
them.
much is allocated to us?
Yeah.
It's frankly not something that we used to look at as much, but because of a lot of the changes that have happened in the last 2 to 3 legislative sessions, there's more adjustments that are not being made on a timely basis. So we're seeing more of a yield than we used to on these audits.
So recapture.
So far, we haven't turned down the check, so.
And it comes as a wire.
Trustees, as we've talked about a lot this semester, I just want to remind us that these numbers, for a lack of better words, tend to be kind of volatile in terms of what we project on revenue. Expenditures are starting to get pretty solidified. But in terms of revenue, that number bounces a little bit. And especially during the legislative session, when any action that makes it to the Senate side will change the funding formula, you can expect those numbers to change as well.
But Dr. Panicle's right, we shouldn't see, we hope not to see as many fluctuations as we've seen, the closer that we get through the session. It's particularly difficult on those years that we have a legislative session, because those are the years that we, and for those districts that are September 1st, rather than July 1st, like for us, July 1st, that's just right up on that deadline, whereas if you're September 1 district, you've got a couple months to work with the information. So that's one benefit to be a September 1. So I kind of wanted to go over some things. We talked about a couple of these just to keep them front in our mind. Obviously, the legislative session outcome could give us a plus or minus. We hope a plus. We're heavily leaning on a plus. If we were able to increase our adjusted APA to 93.5 or higher, but let's say 93.5, that would yield us about $400,000 to $500,000 in additional revenue. If we had additional enrollment, that would be the same. We would get additional funding.
So currently, this budget that we just went through with the board is built on an assumption that our attendance is at 93%. But if we were at 93.5%, we'd be talking about anywhere in the ballpark of about $500,000.
Right, $400,000 to $500,000
And
additional.
currently, we're at about 93.5, is that correct? We're actually north of 93.5 if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Stoner, what are we at?
Our non-adjusted for pre-K is 94.7 right now.
Right, but we we have to adjust down because we are only getting funded for the half day weekday.
Adjusted, that would be over about what, 93.7 or 33.5? It's about 1% difference, right?
Yeah.
So we feel cautiously optimistic that we can do at least 93.5 next year, but to be conservative, we budget on 93%.
I wanted to add this as well, add that critical positions. This has been the second year in a row that we've made really deep cuts at the district level and campuses. And so we have started a process for principals and directors to request adding back critical positions or like a similar process that we did last year for critical positions. And we'll see, again, we may amend the budget if we're able to get additional revenue. So that is something that could be an impact, particularly this year because we made such big cuts. Inflation, as we've stated, we have a 10% contingency built in for inflation, but it's particularly the property insurance until we get that new proposal. We won't know for sure what that is. We are working with our health insurance third-party administrator right now. As you know, health insurance rates are going down, and so that's something that we're dealing with. And then the last thing we wanted to kind of talk about that we brought up last month, so I wanted to bring you some more information, was the information about a voter approval for tax ratification election, the VATRE. So if we kind of go on to talk about that, I just wanted to give you a little bit more information because we did start that conversation in March. So a VATRE is a special election that allows voters to approve a tax rate that's higher than the rate that TEA sets. So how that works is the school district would propose a rate that we felt would be a rate that would provide additional funding for us, and that if that rate exceeds the maximum compressed rate that is set by TEA, then we would call for a tax rate election. And if that tax rate election is approved, then we would get that additional revenue. We could use it for salary and staff benefits and salaries, and maintaining our programs, and also reducing budget deficits. So, just to kind of give you an example of the yield that we might get for each penny. And we would be talking about copper pennies because, as we talked about, we have all of 8 golden pennies. So we don't pay recapture on the golden pennies, but we do on the copper pennies. So we would, just estimate it based on current law and based on our, our funding formula. For example, if you look at one copper penny, the gain would be 1.7 million. We would have to send back 900,000 to the state, so the net gain would be 748,000 to the district.
So they get more than we get.
Yes. Yeah,
That's what it looked like.
5644.
All of
Yeah.
these.
So, a district like Austin ISD that just passed their VATRE, they are sending back more than half of what they.
How do you justify that to the public?
That's been a conversation that we've had.
You tell them you voted for these representatives that put us in this situation.
Yeah, but like,
I mean, so, Ms. McLaughlin, I actually really appreciate your statement there, and representing the community, I think this is the conversation we need to have. There's nothing about, right now in the school district, that indicates that we're calling for an election next month or the month after that. However, as we talk about like looking 3-4 years out at our financial landscape, is this something the Board of Trustees wants to consider? And what are the questions in the community that you represent that you think we need to talk about, like here at this workshop?
How long is a Vader good for? Is it just a 1 year, one and done?
Forever.
Or is it forever?
And it takes a vote to roll it back out.
The school district could always elect to roll a tax rate down.
Yep.
You just can't bring it up.
So we would not have to
Yeah,
go
we don't
back.
need approval to lower it.
Yes.
Correct.
Sir?
Yeah. And that is a good point, because if you recall, we had what they used to call it was a TRE, a tax rate ratification election. Georgetown ISD had a TRE, I think in the early 2000s, and so we are still benefiting from that TRE today, because some districts only have 5 golden pennies, we have 8. And it's because we got 3 through that TRE years ago.
And so a 1% pay raise for staff is what, $1.5 million?
A
Ish.
$1,000 pay
No,
raise.
a 1% pay
1%?
raise is $1.5 million-ish.
1.9 if we did 1% based
Okay.
on this last year's model.
So to get to just to cover
Yeah.
the cost of living adjustment, you're talking 5-6 copper pennies
Mhm.
if we had to fund it that way.
But so the compressed rate is projected to go down, and so,
That will help the recapture go down. Yeah, so this is very preliminary.
Yeah.
These numbers could look better, as we.
well, because I see on our slide, that's not up on that screen, you've got the actual MCR and projected MCR.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
When will we know what the projected, when it's reality or not?
In August.
But there is a
August
chance that we would have the opportunity to call for an election. There's a chance that we could continue to discuss this, and whatever we are talking about in the form of a VATRE would be
Basically.
not an increase at all based upon this year's tax rate.
But ballot language would say this is a tax increase,
We would be required to put on the ballot, this is a tax rate increase, that's correct.
Yeah.
even though there's no.
But
change
really,
in tax.
I mean, we could, if the project, because it's projected to be reduced by 4 cents. And so that's why you gave us this example of what that 4 cents would look like. Even though on the taxpayer end, it really
It's
doesn't.
net.
It's a wash.
It's a wash.
Knowing the sentiments of the community and thinking about something like this, what are the ways in which you feel this would really pay off for the community, no pun intended, to go for this kind of election? Like, what is the benefit the community would want to see, like, that would tangibly show up in Georgetown?
I think they would like to see the programs that they're afraid are gonna disappear are still gonna be in existence.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely an education campaign to, one, let them know what the money would be used for and how it's beneficial. And at the same time, even though you've got that scary, this is a tax rate increase
Right.
language, letting them know that dollar amount that they're gonna be paying on their property taxes is gonna, you know, they're
Still-
always gonna go up a
still
little
same,
bit,
yeah.
because property values increase, but, they won't see a big jump in
Yeah,
their
so
actual
numbers will be
property tax bill.
Yeah, and what it's gonna go for, yeah.
I think also too, some clarification that the money from the bond can't be used to fund
Mhm.
teacher increase. Can help,
Yeah.
can help the voters realize that this money will go toward teacher increase, toward compensation increase.
Mhm.
And we just can't, but we have to be clear that we can't use previous bond money
For that.
most people know that, some people don't. It gets confusing. They'll go, well, I just approved all these, I voted yes on everything, now you want more money. They can just help people understand it.
And also showing them what these numbers look like compared to what the state's taken in recapture already
Yeah.
anyways.
Now, the downside is, people go, well, take most of this money and give it to the state, and then give a little bit that's left to the teachers. That's
So we
gonna
just
take,
gotta be ready to counter that, that's already happening. We're already taking some of their property taxes and giving it to the state just a little bit more.
We need to really reinforce that this problem that we're in has nothing to do with our own inefficiency.
Right, yeah.
The
So-
thing you're making me think about is, it would almost, well, not almost, we would also have to go on an education campaign of what is the evidence we have that shows that we're financially efficient, as an
Yes.
organization, you know.
our A rating.
The first ratings, the efficiency audits that we've had done, just all the things that show like we're literally trying to squeeze water from a rock. at this
Well,
point.
we really gotta celebrate, like if we're able to pull off a balanced budget this year after how many years in a row of a deficit budget? You know, really celebrate that, but also showcase the pain we felt in order to do that.
That's a good point. And speaking of efficiency auditor, if you look at that first bullet, an efficiency audit is required to be performed in order to call a POTRE. So, these dates are set by law. We would have to choose an efficiency auditor. There's several that are available in the state. We would potentially select one on June 16th at the June board meeting. It has to be done by July 4th, 2025, but June 16th would be the meeting that's already on the calendar. And then we'll get our maximum compressed tax rate from TPA on August 5th. The election would need to be called by August 18th, and then election day would be November 4th. So it's a very similar cadence to calling a bond election as far as the law requires you do certain things by certain dates. So if we were to choose to call for the ATRE, this would be kind of the rough. There's some other days as well, but this is kind of just so you have an idea of how that would play out this fall.
Y'all talked about, because we always do the Citizens Advisory Committee for the bond. Would there be time to put something together to really get community input to see if there'd be a stomach for it or not before we start making decisions?
We have the advantage of having put together for the entire spring the long-range planning committee. So that's an existing group that has heard a lot about district level finances and where we're at. And so the nice thing is, since that group is organized, we could dovetail this conversation into that group and really get the temperature of the group. I would, if we were gonna pursue this path, I would say that just like we did for the bond, we would have to survey the community and get some sentiments about would you support something like this if it resulted in X, Y, or Z? And I just, need to say that I'm really proud of the work and the way we went about reducing expenses to get to, as of today, a balanced budget. But at the same time, it's a shame that school districts have to consider going to taxpayers and asking for an election instead of being appropriately funded just to stay financially healthy.
Do we have any, you may not know the answer, and if you don't, no big deal. What percentage of our property tax that we collect is commercial versus residential? And what's that dynamic shift that's happening now?
We have, I'm gonna say 80-20. I'll firm that number up with you. We have much more residential than commercial
Today.
today. However, commercial is increasing.
And so if some of these larger projected projects came in, that would drive our tax,
Revenue up.
our commercial values pay a higher, because their value is so high, some of them have a potential to have tremendous impact
Yeah.
quickly.
Because also many of our residentials are capped at the 10%, so they're just going up 10% per year.
And our demography, yeah, great point, you don't cap commercial, we all feel it.
Yeah.
Our demographer doesn't present anything on the commercial side of it. Is that something we can get them to start looping in? Because there are some projects that have potential to have a substantial impact to where even if the community can't stomach a tax rate increase, if they can get behind some of these projects, there may be.
James, can you explain that? I'm not sure that I'm following.
Yes.
And maybe what the impact is on the corporate, because we all see what's going on around the freeways.
I think Devin could probably put maybe more elegant words to what I'm saying.
No, absolutely. So the more commercial property value we're able to gain in Georgetown, it actually lowers the burden on homeowners while increasing revenue for the school district. I think working with the Georgetown Economic Development staff members and getting some of that information, we can get some projections about how it would impact the school district using third parties that we already use for the school district to kind of project revenue.
I don't know if I even want to drop this bomb, but aren't some of the commercial developments doing some deals where they are able to avoid paying some of the
So
property, the tax for school districts? What's that?
The 313s?
Yeah,
No, well, the 313s went away.
okay.
So there's no longer the,
for school districts, there's still
For school
economic
districts.
inside of
Yes.
cities and counties where they can make those concessions, but it won't impact schools any longer.
Okay, but then isn't there something, and maybe we'll just address that at a later time, but there's something else that,
With apartment complexes?
yeah, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have a lot of that,
Okay,
but there is some sort of tax credit that,
Right, it's per door or something.
Yeah.
But
they
it's
have a lower.
specific to like multifamily,
Right,
density,
they
like high density
accept.
housing.
okay,
Except lower socioeconomic.
and that's not the bulk of our commercial?
No, it's the guys like CellLink who are coming in and putting larger
Okay.
brick and mortar type distribution or the data
There's a lot
centers,
of
like your tech
industrial.
companies, your cats of the world, like those guys are the guys I'm talking about. Those properties on 35 are worth a small fortune and they get taxed and they never get the exemptions that a residential house gets. And so as that escalates at a much higher rate, which is why cities like Austin and Round Rock benefit because they have such high commercial industrial property values compared to the residential.
It's also good for us because as residential goes up, that means more students, so we're, at the same time we're getting more revenue, we have more expenditures, whereas with commercial,
Yeah.
it doesn't really have that. Okay, just briefly, just to kind of give you a little bit forward view here. June 2nd, we have another budget workshop, and we'll review budget and compensation models. It is also the last day of the regular legislative session, so maybe that's a good coincidence. The governor has until June 22nd to veto bills, so that's also important because even if something has passed the House and the Senate, if the governor decides to veto it, you can do that till June 22nd. And then June 16th is when we'll have our full meeting to approve the budget and compensation plan. That's our regular June board meeting. So we're getting close to the finish line. Still a lot of moving parts.
with enthusiasm, very good. All right, so we're going to move ahead to, trustees, do you have any other questions regarding budget?
So many.
Great.
Yeah, so.
Thank you, Jennifer.
So we're moving on to the next agenda item, which is it?
We're gonna have an update from Wes Vanacek on our bond projects. And we're gonna skip past the shadow.
I had so much prepared.
Now, you know, you did not.
Alrighty guys, so just quick update on our bond project. I'm gonna show you some things that you've seen before, but just to kind of keep a good record, and then some things that we've not seen yet. So obviously the bulk of our construction work is in Prop A. We've got these 4 facilities that we are working feverishly on. The first one, the big new high school over on DB Woods and Cedar Breaks Road. It's just showing kind of an aerial view. No new information on this slide necessarily, but just making sure our viewers are getting the same information too. But we have started, scheduled to open in fall of 2028. It's a large facility, 530,000 square feet, 2,250 on the students, and this is comprehensive.
Wes, can you give us a ballpark on when we think groundbreaking might be for the school?
I think we'll look probably early fall at the earliest to do groundbreaking. That'll kind of get the site looking broken, if that makes sense. And before it gets too crazy going vertical.
Fall of 2025.
I think at the earliest. I think we can take a look and see if we need to slide it back. It's such a long construction phase. I think I think the earliest would be this fall. If it feels right to slide a little bit further into construction, I think we could. Feels like we might have to break the ground 3 times for folks to remember that we're still doing this 37-month project. So I think earliest would be in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. So last time I showed you some renderings, so we've actually got folks on site. So we are permitted and cleared all of the obstacles, and so we had folks out there starting on the 15th of April. They are putting up silt protection, they are clearing brush, so it's starting to look like a construction site. And so if you've driven by that area, this is a sign, a scene that you would see, Cox sign, our sign, we've got everything in place. Get busy real fast. We do expect to submit for the building permit towards the end of the summer. We'll go through a couple of revisions with the city before that's fully finalized, and then we'll start going permit. Any questions on the high school?
Yes.
You bet.
What's the process for naming it?
That's a good question. So there's some board policy around naming our schools, so we'll certainly follow our board policy. We've got kind of a timeline that we've got a little bit of a roadway before we have to activate that process, but we want to have that done before we get ready to actually finalize a zone for the school.
So with the school opening in 28, we'd probably land on naming at the latest spring of 28, but more likely fall of 27. And then unlike schools we've opened in the past, for middle school 5, elementary school 12, and then this high school, we're actually going to designate colors before a principal has been named, because that helps with getting all the interior finishes done on time instead of scrambling later. And the board will be brought into those conversations as well. Sweet.
Will the rezoning conversation start?
We would start about a year prior to.
And you think
fall
it'll be
27.
set enough a year out, because of the way things are changing and growing?
I think we
out there?
probably, they need to be in place by early spring of 27. So we'll be running through that fall and winter leading up to it.
I'll be watching from the sidelines.
You will be nominated to be part of the
Right.
Part of the PR campaign.
Welcome to the long-range meeting.
Exactly.
It may help endear people to the new school if we don't tell them you're going to the new school, which will be named later.
Do we know that construction on DB Wood will be done by then?
Yeah.
As far as the road
By the
goes,
time
like it's not an
it's
I-35
open.
type setting where it's gonna be 10 years before it's done.
It should
It will
be
be
clear.
done before teenagers are driving.
It should be cleared, and I never like to use the word should.
Should, yes, it should.
We just don't have a lot of control over that.
Right,
The
I just didn't know what date they had given as far as.
I can tell you about the construction of the site.
Not
the site,
DB Wood itself,
DB
and just some of the
Wood.
safety concerns where some of those turnoffs are gonna be,
There's some
on top of
additional lights
construction.
come in and stuff like that, yeah, and some decel lanes and stuff.
That's sketchy out there.
It's gonna
Yes, it is. All right, so jumping forward to kind of our sister site with middle school 5 and elementary 12. With middle school 5, this is a very similar footprint to current New Benold as well as Wagner Middle School. We are started, we're going to take a look at pictures. We're scheduled to open in fall of 26. 950 student capacity, and it is shared with elementary 12. Let's see it down in the southeast corner of the district. Same story on elementary 12, 850 students in that facility. It's on the shared site, same time schedule as well. So here is a pretty close update as to what it looks like. Actually, it is going and going. So middle school is nearest elementary, kind of in the back. And here's another one. And so 130 is the highway you see kind of in the top left corner of the screen. Eastview would be north and to the top right corner of the screen. Making good progress. And this facility, we are doing a grand opening, not a grand opening, excuse me, groundbreaking Friday morning 9 a.m. We are getting ready to open up the new Frost conversion. That's a little bit of a dramatic statement. We're not ready to open, but we're ready but not ready. Meaning we're making great progress. I think we're all ready to be done with this project. This is a tight turnaround. It's an 11-month construction project, and so it pushed everybody. But I think the result is going to be really nice. I think it's going to create a lot more flexibility in that area of the districts with the capacity going up to 850 students in that area.
And Wes, if community members ask, so if we're moving to a new Frost, what's going to happen with current Frost, which will then become old Frost? What are we going to do with that building?
That's right. Good question. So, and just I don't want to steal too much of the land and thunder necessarily, but we do have the long-range planning committee has been meeting on these particular topics for a while. There is a facilities committee of that subcommittee of that larger committee that's studying old Frost as well as old Pickett and really trying to land the plan on what's the right thing to do with those spaces, juggling kind of other departmental needs as well as potential different programming uses. So we're not quite ready to present what we think is a great idea, but we've got a good group of folks working on it. Taking a look at, so this is February, so this is a picture you saw last time we talked about construction projects, and here we are. Just I think this is last week, so it's starting to take shape. Just for orientation, the Northwest Boulevard is kind of crossing the top of the page there. So this is the old back of Benold, now the new front of Frost.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, it kind of gave the building a kind of whole new life.
Gave it its own identity.
Yeah,
No, that's
it's
exactly
good.
right. Yeah.
Is this all new parking?
This
Yeah.
is all new parking.
Okay.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah. So it's coming together nicely, and I think we're really excited about that space. We've taken the teachers and staff on tours and seen it, and it's almost unrecognizable. When we went earlier in the fall, we could see remnants of eagle blue on the walls, and that was the only way you knew where you were at. So really fascinating.
Is there gonna be a ribbon cutting?
There's going to be a ribbon cutting or a grand opening, kind of the way we did our new schools this fall, so kind of with the open house ceremonies in the early fall, or early mid-August.
And for now, we're staying with the current Frost zoning. I assume that's gonna get relooked when you do the zoning for elementary school 12. Is this gonna be part of the conversation?
Yeah, I don't want to, well, it's kind of going to dovetail with long-range planning committee, but we can anticipate that next school year between November and February will be a pretty significant district-wide rezoning effort to balance all of our schools and ensure the west side has equally populated schools. And, well, if not equally populated, well-utilized buildings.
But, so this will be
Part of it, though.
Part of it,
empty
Part of
for
the
a year.
rezoning, yes.
Yeah.
Next project, this is one we've not talked about too terribly much in here, but this is the ECU High School PAC Center. So first disclaimer is what you see on the screen is a rendering. It's conceptual only, so it's not been fully designed yet. But these were some of the early images that we saw. We really liked the branding, kind of the prestige that it brought that site. So we're in the middle of design phase right now. We expect this to open up January of 2028 and be ready to be used for that spring. There is an additional renovation at Eastview in the field house, and we're at kind of the same pace of design on that right now. And so we are in the early stages. We've just finished what's called schematic design, and we'll go through our first pricing exercise in the next about 10 days to understand where we're at on that.
How many seats?
The looking at right around 800 seats. Preliminarily, like I said, we've not done that pricing exercise.
Everyone bring their own lawn chair.
That's right. Here's just a site to show you where the work is happening at Eastview. So this is the existing fine arts space. This is kind of that fine arts entrance, and so what I showed you was it kind of wrapping around this corner. I've actually worked a neat idea where it doesn't impact, kind of enhances the bus drop off and pick up right there on the edge. Creates some neat adjacencies inside the current building. It allows current operations to be expanded as opposed to interrupted once it's finished. Right? And then the field house down at the bottom. And I think what we're able to do there is a little bit more generous than the red. We'll extend kind of this direction a little bit further and be able to bring in quite a bit more facilities and bring those up with what is at GHS and what's being slated for the Fourth High School. So we'll have commensurate facilities there as well. Excited about that.
Can you stay on that slide for a second, just so that I make sure I'm not telling people in the community the wrong thing? That construction that's happening just north and to the east,
Over here?
that's,
To the east.
I'm sorry, to the west.
You
The
passed it.
construction, yeah, right there.
That's the new neighborhood and HEB and whatnot,
That's
correct?
correct.
And our school is gonna be south and west.
Down there.
Almost due east of that.
The middle
The
school
new
and
school,
elementary.
yes, yeah, the new
Right.
schools, yeah, are
Right
down.
down there.
That's correct. That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thought I was saying that right, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah, that's right. We filled that question. The construction that's happening up here is not out.
This road's going.
Right, there was
That's
a
the one I'm getting the
facility
most
there,
questions
it's been
about.
raised.
Are you going to school right now?
That's right, that's not easy.
That's it.
Those are homes, and we'll see them there very shortly.
Thank you.
You bet. Any more questions on kind of those projects? So additionally, we've got some renovation projects that are in design. Forbes Middle School is also having a fine arts and weight room additions. We were just out there today looking at different ideas and options. So we're excited about those. They're definitely going to get expansions. The new weight room will be commensurate with the other middle school weight rooms. The new fine arts kind of wing will have spaces commensurate with our other middle school spaces in terms of square footage. So that's going to be a really nice addition for them. Looking for fall of '26 for completion on the Forbes jobs. And then we've got flooring, painting, light, firearm kind of projects, some of what we call some of the dirtier projects that are currently in design. We'll try to stagger these between the next 2 summers so that we're obviously very disruptive work on a campus level. But we'll get in there, and I believe at Forbes, for example, we'll be able to do some of the flooring and paint in the hallways, and then next summer come back and do the classrooms. And then the Cooper Elementary Playground replacement is in progress to be completed this coming summer.
Wes, if I'm a community member, it feels like years ago we passed the 2024 bond, when in reality it was literally a year ago
Yeah.
this past weekend. And in the community, it's easy to say like, hey, where are these projects? When is this going to happen? If I'm a community member, where can I find out information about where are we in these projects? When are we projecting that they'll be complete? Should we put your cell phone number on Facebook? Yes.
I screen calls and I don't know the numbers. So our Georgetown ISD, we have a bond website that gets updated regularly. We've got some new photos up there as well. There is a timeline up there on the bond website, so I think that's the best spot to go. And of course, if a person's questions are not answered there, they can certainly drop a let's talk and we'll get a more specific answer if there is something for them. So.
I mentioned that because even some of our staff members have questions about, hey, I thought we're going to fine arts renovation at our middle school, what's going on? And so what I appreciate about Wes and the team he works with is they're constantly updating those timelines and being responsive. And if we can't provide an answer, we continue to engage until we can provide some clarity.
And that's good, because people see that HEB spot coming out. The new performing arts center is going to be huge. Slow down.
Sponsored by HEB.
Now there's an idea. So we will bring this same information to our our bond advisory, or our CAC committee, next month. We're gonna make sure that we bring it to you guys first. So that next one's in early June. And then, like I said, we've got groundbreaking coming Friday morning for our elementary 12, middle school 5, not immediately adjacent to Eastview, but south a little west. Yeah, that's what we got going on. We'll come back to you in a couple of months with kind of better plans for groundbreaking the high school and naming and zoning, that kind of piece for those that are a little bit further down the runway for us.
I have one other question.
Yeah.
What determines when a high school opens with just a freshman class or the whole shebang? Is that again something we evaluate later down the road? Because I know like 5A, 6A, we teeter on that 2,200 number, which the high schools are pretty close to. So how does that get determined?
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. So a couple things come into play. First of all, as we get ready to open in fall of 2028 for the high school, what is the population of Georgetown High School and Eastview High School, and what do we feel like is necessary to balance the schools? A second thing that comes into play is actually, and this ends up being significant, is it a UIL classification year? Because that will impact whether juniors and seniors get to play, varsity and when that happens. And so what we want to do is try to protect the students' experience in extracurriculars without sacrificing how do we balance our schools at the same time. So it could be 9-10, could be 9-10-11. Rarely is it 9-10-11-12. We usually allow seniors to finish out.
Thank you.
Great question.
Yes, a lot of high school.
That's all I've got for you for construction updates, so thank you.
Thank you.
Trustees, any other questions on construction updates?
No.
Mr. President, would you like to take a break?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will come back into the board workshop.
Appreciate it.
All right, trustees, we're back in open session or board workshop, and before Landon takes it from here and talks about the long-range planning committee, I just want to share with you, I'm real proud of the work that has gone on so far. It would be really easy with some of these tough projects that Landon's going to describe to you for the senior leadership team to just kind of get in a room and come to conclusions and recommendations to the board of trustees about what we should do, but ultimately, these are the community schools and the community students and the community's buildings. And so we wanted to engage as many community members as possible in helping bring together a recommendation that we can ultimately bring to you so that you can workshop the issue with us. And we made it clear to the Long Range Planning Committee, this isn't a decision-making body. This isn't a decision they're landing on. Rather, they're making a recommendation to us, and as they make a recommendation, the tougher part of their job is to tell us all of the nuances of why this recommendation would be a solid idea and what are the consequences of a recommendation or not following a recommendation. That way we have a whole picture of what we need to consider as we think about what should we do about open enrollment, underutilized facilities, and specialized programs. So, Mr. Heffner.
Well, Lindsay Harris and I are here to kick it off, and as Dr. Padwell pointed out, with pen in hand, listen and take notes as to your thoughts and ideas on this presentation. So what you'll see today is a little bit of background information that I'm going to share. Some of it you've heard before, so please forgive us for the repeat on some information, and then it will slide over into what we're really excited about, which is the first subcommittee sharing of information. So you'll see and remember we had 3 subcommittees. And so really bringing this idea forward, but to kick us off, I want to just take us back to January 14th when Georgetown ISD launched our long-range planning committee. This committee, as Dr. Padwell pointed out, serves in an advisory role. They know that that's their stake in it. We reminded them that they are bringing recommendations to the superintendent that align to our mission, beliefs, and strategic blueprint. that they prioritize student learning experiences that prepare the students for their future. They're mindful of every student's learning opportunities. They optimize the use of our facilities, maintain fiscal responsibility, and address the challenges of current and future growth. So we showed this every single time we met, reminding them what their purpose and parameters are. A little bit about the committee makeup: 83 total members, 69 voting members, 14 district staff. Pretty much everyone around the table here is included in that number 14. 7 meetings on the dock. We've had 6 of them. Our 7th meeting will come up in May, and then subcommittees have had various connections in between. Wes and team took people out on tours, for example, to see the facilities that they were talking about. A lot of communication, thank you, Ms. Harris, for all the communication that she quarterbacks between the meetings and keeping everybody up to date. Some factors that are driving, again, not representative, just representative, not exhaustive list of our factors. We need a long-range plan that looks out 5 to 10 years. We have geographically uneven distribution and growth. If you look at kind of around the borders of the district, the edges of the district. Uneven socioeconomic distribution and growth. Competition from charter schools is real. We have fractured feeder patterns and cohort cohesiveness. This really, those of you that lived with us through the last rezoning, was our first time to not have the pure feeder pattern scenario. Remember some of the conversations around that. Increasingly congested roadways, we've done away with those, that's not a problem anymore. And transportation challenges that come with that. Remaining a 5A district, our commitment to stay at that level. Community partnership, safety, and of course, as you heard earlier, inadequate funding from the state to help us with all of this. So our problem committees, as we call them, not an exhaustive list again, but things that we knew we had to bring to the community to help us wrestle down and eventually come up with recommendations on. These are not everything they've been talking about, by the way. You'll see a short list in a second. But you see a list here, I won't read them all to you, but none of these should be unfamiliar to you. We talk about them, or at least maybe your constituents talk to you about them in different capacities, but I'll cherry pick a couple of them. You'll see full utilization of facilities. You're going to see that one in a few minutes. Some academic, innovative programs that we might bring into our schools. And of course, the inter-district transfer of the opportunities. So those were the 3 that rose to the top as the focus areas for the committee for the season that we're in, which is a hint to say that this committee will continue to meet. We'll bring these projects to fruition and then meet again starting next fall and take on a whole new crop. But full utilization of existing facilities, those are our facilities that don't have kids in them, so that to just avoid any confusion, we're not talking about schools that have empty seats. We're talking about schools that are Pickett, Old Frost, et cetera. Innovative programs at certain schools, unique programs that provide attractive choices, and then inter-district transfers, which is code for letting students that don't live in our school district have the opportunity to transfer and attend our schools. Lots of strings attached to that. So the committee makeup, just as a reminder, 1 large committee that then became 3 subcommittees, so we meet both ways each time. Special thanks to the staff members you see here who are the leads for these groups. And they are charged with bringing these informed recommendations forward. So with that, we have our very first opportunity to talk about the first committee. So let me give it over to Dr. Phil.
Thank you, Landon. So going to speak to the work that the open enrollment subcommittee did over the past 3.5 months or so. I chaired it along with Amanda Johnson and then Donna Stanford, who's in our information systems department. So just a couple definitions, and we talk about open enrollment. What does that mean, and what do we talk about? We talk about 2 different strands, even though primarily this is about out-of-district transfers, also known as inter-district, and that's where students who are not residing in Georgetown ISD, we would allow them to be able to attend Georgetown ISD schools. And then we also talked about intra-district transfers because there's some parallels that need to run between those 2 as with processes and then also you know, if we allow some things for out-of-district transfers, but not for in-district transfers, just conversation about what that would mean for our residents. And inter-district is students who reside in GISD attendance zones, but would go to a school that they're not actually zoned for. So someone for example, could be zoned for Ford, but wanted to attend Frost, right? So that's pretty much where we discussed. And then we currently have some practices and some policies with regards to open enrollment. FDA local actually says that the superintendent can accept out-of-district transfers, inter-district, provided it's done, of course, without discrimination, and that is super important because that just means we need to be really consistent with how we determine who we, what parameters we put on who we would accept from out-of-district. And we do make some exceptions already. If you're an employee and you don't live in the district, we do allow your child to attend GISD schools. And then there are some rare circumstances that come up that the superintendent can approve that. And then intra-district is where the vast majority of our transfers, oh, that's probably not true. I would say probably, I can get the numbers for you, but we have quite a few inter-district because we have a lot of employee kids that transfer, right? But we do have some in-district, and I'm speaking from some level of authority because my department happens to live in this world. So intra-district local, FDD local says that basically if you live in the district, you're required to attend the school that your student is zoned for. So by policy, we don't make exceptions, but there are some rare exceptions. For example, employees, bullying, and then we do have special circumstances. So, you know, you can make an allowance on those special circumstances. Again, having to really be consistent with that. So this is a form that Lindsay and Landon created for us to use, and I'm just sharing it because this is going to be provided, can be provided to you with a list of all the positives and potential negatives for each of the options that we discussed. And just so you guys, for you to know, we went through a lot of information about this. You're going to receive all of that. What are the problems, essential questions that we struggled with? What are the important facts? A lot of research that was both provided for the committee members and also gleaned from them. And then for each recommendation, actually there's just one recommendation that the committee decided to move forward with, recommending to the board, but there's options. There's 4 main options that they discussed. And those 4 main options, there could be lots of little nuances of like, you know, what they wanted, but the 4 were based off of the research, the conversation, and the work we had done together over the past 3 months or so. So you'll receive all of those. Even if it wasn't a recommendation, you'll still receive those for the other things because there's just a ton of information and a lot of things, positives and negatives that were weighed when the committee was determining which one to bring forward for a recommendation. So here's the recommendation. The recommendation is let's not look at expanding to out of district at this time. And real key is at this time. We'll go through pluses and minuses, pros and cons, and again, you're going to get this for this recommendation and then for the next 3 things that I share with you, or the 3 options that we discussed. So pros of holding tight on opening up out-of-district transfers for the committee, they just said that it doesn't impact the normal workload of the campus or the district, allows the district to see how rezoning and opening of new schools impact the capacity at the campuses. Just because we don't do anything right now doesn't mean we wouldn't have to ever do anything. There's some discussion about culture of the schools. You know, traditionally we have neighborhood schools and opening things up to out-of-district, other districts, people who do not live in the district. That could impact the culture, so this would not be realized if we didn't allow for it. Doesn't require any changes, so things like policy and procedures and just maintaining out-of-district transfers wouldn't have to be on I guess, the workload of the departments. Less impact to class sizes equals happier teachers, and limits enrollment to GISD residents. And I think what they meant by this was that when you're taking out-of-district transfers, then we're using GISD money for out-of-district people who do not live in the community or the district. So you'll see, what we did is we went through all 4 of the options, had them vote independently on all 3 as to whether or not they felt like it should be recommended to the board. So this one, 9 out of 12 felt like this is an option that should be recommended to the board. Cons for choosing this option that the committee
Dr.
decided?
Stoner, if you can go
Yes.
back real quick.
Sure.
When you talk about less impact to class sizes, that was kind of more of a fear people had than an actual reality, because we would still keep class size at the current ratio regardless of how many students were at the school.
Same ratio, but it would be, if you're gonna take more, right, maybe there would be a class of 20 that is now like a class of 22 or something, or 18 and 20, right? It would just increase. That was just, again, a concern that they had brought.
And then in terms of limiting funding to Georgetown ISD students, we would still see added funding on per pupil enrollment. Was there any conversation about the difference of what the financial burden would be if a student came from out of district, or was that more kind of speculation and fear-based instead of like actual hard numbers?
We didn't actually talk about numbers per se. I think it was more also like a perception thing, right? That we don't have a lot of extra funding right now, and now we'd be spending it possibly like through Chromebooks. There was some question about like what it would actually equate to.
We did talk about the funding that comes in with enrollment and of course the impact with attendance and things like that. But where their concern came in is exactly what Heather's talking about as well. But we're gonna have to hire more teachers, and we did explain, because we visited with Round Rock, Heather and I did, and talked to them about how they staff and how they make sure that class size doesn't go over the 22-to-1. And it is quite a process to do that, but it starts happening early in the spring, and the Heather counterpart over there works very closely with HR in that regard. But really, Dr. Paddable, a lot of that came up with kind of these Chromebooks would have to be purchased, and what does it look like? UIL impact came up quite a bit. They were wondering about things like that with adding kids to programs, and it was very difficult for us to give them an exact number of what that would or wouldn't do, but we did have conversations around the funding that would come in with it if they were attending.
Thank you. All right, let's move forward.
Dr. Paddle, can I ask a
yeah.
question? In the past, and I don't even know when this was, a district used to get some financial benefit from allowing transfers in from other school districts. You remember that period of time? Is that still the case?
Yes, so Jennifer, do you want to describe like how that funding, just in layman's terms, how it would
Right,
impact
so the
us?
funding does follow the student, so we would get that basic allotment plus any weighted funding. I think where the complexity comes is that we would need to do it to level out classes and not add additional staff. So that
Makes
is
sense.
where it then tips to where we would potentially be spending more than what we were bringing in for those.
And that
for
could
those
benefit a district, I mean, like Westlake, that we have some districts that have a decreasing enrollment, then allowing that to come in would be really helpful. And maybe that's the cases that people were looking at it. Yeah.
Jennifer, to use your example and answer Ms. Malton's question, let's pretend we had open enrollment and at Frost Elementary, there were, if class size was set at 22 and we had, one fourth grade classroom at Frost that had a class of 20 and they had 2 spots available, and then 2 in second grade that had 2 spots available just below 22. 22 is our threshold. And we told those families, we have 4 total spots available, so, this student could go here and this student can go here at Frost. So would we see the funding of 4 additional students, $6,160 times 4, for Georgetown ISD as a whole?
We would.
But it would only be added funding if we didn't put a cap on it. And we went
Right.
over and we had to add an additional teacher, which is 60,000 plus benefits, if we didn't monitor that and hold to only for the spots available and no one else. Okay.
That does come up a little more in the cons of this choice. There's plenty of, you're gonna see there's actually more cons on this list than there are pros for this option, and I'll kind of explain for why that is in a second. So cons for this choice, the committee said existing overcrowded schools remain overcrowded, and existing underutilized schools will remain underutilized.
And when you say cons of this choice, you're saying cons of not doing open enrollment at this
Correct,
time.
yeah, so for this one recommendation, actually each option, they looked at pros and cons. So I'm just showing you pros and cons of the ones that they sent forward as a recommendation. And so then if we do this one, may have to close the school if utilization is too low. The need to rezone attendance zones goes up because, and you know, it's a lot of times people aren't super excited about you telling them that their kiddos can have to be rezoned. And so that's a negative, because you may have to do more of that if, you know, schools aren't as balanced as we like them to be. This is a big one that we talk a lot about, loss of revenue at a minimum of $61.60 per out-of-district transfer, potential lost impact to the budget for underutilized schools, continue to limit a parent's ability to choose GISD for their school for their child, because we did talk about inter-district and intra-district kind of running parallel, potentially decreases the number of available applicants for special programs. We talked about if you were to expand it, then some of these classes that are very small with numbers, it would be more efficient to run those programs. AP Physics at the high school is an example of that. If over-enrollment is unaddressed, parents may be more inclined to elect to leave GISD for charter schools. So this lends to the question, well, there's a lot of cons on the recommendation from the committee, and I think it really boils down to kind of that second bullet, but these are the contingencies for this recommendation, that perhaps this year we could kind of keep track of anybody who would want their child to transfer in. We do have people that call our department or talk to campuses about wanting to enroll in the district, and we could keep track of that to see what that impact would look like. And then this bullet is bolded on purpose, and that's because this really was the sentiment. Now Rachel's here to speak from that committee as well, if she'd like. But after rezoning and opening new buildings, the other options could be reconsidered. There was just a real concern from the committee about so many changes happening at this point in planning. Legislature, new schools opening, rezoning going on next year, and so that's why they made this recommendation. Was at this time it felt like this was the kind of responsible recommendation to make. The other considerations, they also voted independently on each of these three. So 5 out of 12, 42%. We established that consensus was 65%. So the other considerations that we should allow out-of-district transfers, and then only for them, so just out-of-district transfers, keep in-district as is. 5 out of 12 felt like that was a recommendation that should be moved forward to you guys. Another one is GISD should allow both out-of-district and in-district to all campuses with capacity. So really anybody who's got capacity, we would find what that is. And then the third one was expand out-of-district and in-district. So like number 2. But number 3 is just let's run a smaller trial so we can see what that looks like. So none of those made the consensus minimum to be considered recommendations, but you guys will get all that information if you'd like to see the pros and cons of each of those choices as well. What questions about what was shared do you guys have?
A couple wild cards that I think are worthy of discussion when it comes to open enrollment and the board discussing it with us. First is there's a degree of detail that needs to be worked out on what does this process look like and how do we go about it in a way that's equitable, if not, to use the word from policy, non-discriminatory, right? And the second one is we're on the cusp of a large rezoning effort next year. And so how does open enrollment, if we were to pursue open enrollment this year, that adds a degree of complexity to what rezoning looks like next year.
And that sums up a lot of the sentiment of the committee. Was
Yeah.
not in opposition to the idea, but just the timing. Would you say so?
A sentiment that I didn't see in print, but that the committee also recommended or talked about repeatedly was once a student would be approved for open enrollment, if we pursued it, there was a real strong consensus that that student remains in Georgetown ISD as long as they follow expectations in Georgetown ISD. We wouldn't want to get ourselves into a situation where, well, it's middle school time now and there's not room at the middle schools, you have to go back to your home district.
Yeah, that's a contingency on the other options, so that was definitely something that is in the paperwork that we completed.
Would that also apply for intra-district? Would they be grandfathered into that new campus that they move to and go through that feeder pattern, or would they have to reconsider it every year?
No, that was also for
So they
That-
either
the
inter or
sentiment-
intra, once the kid was accepted into that campus, they get to stay there.
That's our current policy too, right? As long as, if the capacity and, behavior and, yeah, attendance, yeah.
So if capacity changed, then they would have been pulled, sent back to their home.
That, I mean, that's something that we consider every year, right? I mean, we have some, I mean, though, it's spelled out pretty well in our transfer process that if they have been there for multiple years, then it's not a concern. If it's a one-year thing, then it is a discussion, but I would say, I would be guessing to tell you if we, but, yeah, so that was definitely a feeling of the committee, was to make sure that there's a lot of thought about the parameters that we set on how we would determine whether or not we accepted a student, but then also like not having them bounce back and forth from district to district or campus to campus within the district.
They were very thoughtful about not letting a second grader come, right, and then next year saying, sorry, I'm glad you made all your second grade friends, but you can't come back, so.
I think to your question though, Ms. McFarland, lots of conversation around if we did something for inter-district, then we need to be doing it for intra because those are Georgetown ISD taxpayers.
Yeah.
So if that policy was allowed for inter-districts, the recommendation of the group was sort of persistently, then it needs to be
Apply
happening for
consistent
people that
across the
live
board.
within the district.
Did siblings come up at all? Like if you have one that's in third grade, you have one that's coming, like I wanna know that my kindergarten is gonna be able to be with my, did that come up in
It
discussion?
was in the same, around the same conversation that they wanted to make sure there was continuity.
And that's tricky too, because
Yeah.
as they would have to look at available seats
Mm-hmm.
scattered around where areas are there, what if there's not room for the sibling in their equivalent grade level? So, yeah, that's why I said with lots of strings attached, there's,
And it presumes some predictability.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
2
Are
years
we
down the
gonna have
road.
capacity next year?
Right.
and then if you don't, now,
Right.
we're not gonna send them back, so now you are in a hiring situation.
When we talk to our neighboring district, they cap it like 90%. So before you ever get to the point where you only have 20, right,
Built-in
like you
buffer.
mentioned earlier, there's a buffer there to where at some point you just start saying no, so that you can even account for move-ins during the year in our own district.
Three things. First of all, just as a reminder, I probably said it, beating a dead horse at this time. The committee's responsibility was to give you a series of recommendations and tell you all the possible pros and cons for us to wrestle through as a team as we consider next steps. Second, there is another Central Texas school district of considerable size that is considering open enrollment, and they're also talking about it for the 26-27 school year because they're wrestling through a lot of the same levels of detail that we just kind of laid out for you as well. And then lastly, I just want to thank Landon and Lindsay for their work really leading this entire thing, and Dr. Stoner led the open enrollment, obviously, but along with Donna Stanford and Amanda, that just the work of over the course of several months of just wrestling with the group is just teeth gnashing work. But we hear a lot of perspectives that by the time we walked out of our last one, we're like, I didn't know that, I didn't see it that way, or we didn't consider that. So that's the part of this process that's really helpful.
Very wise. Can I ask a question about the Vader?
Yeah.
Was that brought up because of what yesterday was? May the 4th?
You may have to sit on that.
You guys.
It took you that long.
I wanted to wait until it was appropriate time.
That was well timed.
May the 4th be with you.
That was well timed.
Yeah.
We will close every board meeting with a dad joke.
Oh, yeah.
All right, trustees, aside from that question, are there any other questions?
I guess I'm not getting an answer.
Well done.
Thank you. All right, I believe that was our last topic. All right.
Thank you all very much.
Trustees, this closes our board workshop. Thank you so much.
Really well done.